Across the planet, there are places that seem to have already drawn the line for life. And yet, humans still find a way to step in, hold on, and survive. Barren deserts where the heat burns away every sign of life. Frozen towns where even a single breath feels cold enough to freeze your lungs. Or struggling to cling to cliffs and isolated islands, gambling with deadly winds and storms just to make it through another day. The more brutal nature becomes, the more resilient human footsteps seem to be, repeated again and again for tens of thousands of years. They do not choose to retreat. Instead, they take root deep in Mother Earth, as if the will to survive is stronger than the cruelty of the planet itself. Let's explore the harshest places on Earth, where nature never stops testing human endurance. (134°F) is the highest temperature ever recorded. And it was measured right in Death Valley, on the eastern edge of California, where the landscape looks as if the Earth has just been burned. You step out of the car and immediately feel the heat searing your skin. The ground is cracked and swollen, and every step makes your shoes feel like they are touching the mouth of a furnace. The thick air seems to comfort you with a burning breath. Across the desert, warning signs about extreme heat are everywhere, to the point where eggs can cook on the surface of rocks. The scariest part lies in Badwater Basin, a massive salt flat stretching over 200 miles. The patchy white salt dunes spread out like dry bones under the scorching sun. Hot wind carries sand and dust that whip against your skin like needles, and shade becomes a precious gift. Out of 8 billion people on Earth, only about 35 choose to live here. No phone signal, no noise, and survival under extreme heat that researchers and reckless adventurers want to face in order to test the final limits of themselves. You are entering the Danakil Depression, one of the hottest and harshest places in Ethiopia. The blackened ground is covered with volcanoes and acid lakes quietly boiling like hell on Earth, lighting up the area. Sitting 119 meters below sea level, this land is so dry that every stream flowing into it evaporates completely under temperatures above 45 degrees Celsius. Color slowly drains from the world, and the insane heat burns your lungs as it keeps rising. Dallol appears with multicolored acid pools, yellow sulfur layers giving off a sharp stench, and warped terrain that looks like it came from another planet. Just one touch, and everything could be corroded in an instant, enough to send chills down your spine. In a land where the sun burns fiercely, the Afar people, with their stubbornness and extraordinary ability to recover, have survived for centuries. Their nomadic life in tents in the middle of nowhere says a lot. Under the burning sun, they cut salt by hand, then load it onto long camel caravans stretching across the blazing desert. The Thar Desert spreads across nearly 200,000 square kilometers, like a dry ocean of sand in western India. Here, the sun burns without rest, and endless sand slopes and violent winds rule everything. The heat has become legendary, rising above 50 degrees. Sweat evaporates instantly, and dehydration is always a constant threat among dunes sculpted by winds that never stop shifting. Water is more valuable than any other resource. With rainfall of only about 120 to 240 millimeters each year, every drop of water decides the survival of both people and the economy. Many areas are covered in white salt because of over-irrigation, making farming extremely difficult. Humans, animals, and plants have adapted like desert masters for centuries. No modern comforts are available. They live in clay houses, wrap turbans around their heads to protect themselves from sun and dust. Camel caravans quietly cross the sea of sand under a way of life pulled back to the most basic values: water, food, and survival. There is a green oasis that appears like a miracle in the middle of an endless sea of sand. That is Siwa Oasis in western Egypt. The sun hangs overhead, burning the 80-kilometer-wide oasis in 40 degrees Celsius heat. Hot wind from the Sahara blows through, carrying fine sand into every crack in the stone and every breath. Rain here is so rare that only a few millimeters fall each year, almost nothing. Bright white salt lakes reflect harsh sunlight like giant mirrors, while sand dunes hundreds of meters high keep shifting with the wind. And then, in a landscape that seems burned to the ground, tens of thousands of date palms still rise green and strong. Ancient underground springs nourish olive groves, fields, and the Siwa community that has lived here for thousands of years. They build houses from clay and salt, speak their own Berber language, and live slowly in one of North Africa's harshest environments. But this miracle is always fragile. Life depends on one thing: water. If the water source runs dry, the desert will quickly swallow everything, returning Siwa to sand and wind. Others found their shelter by digging deep underground. In Coober Pedy, the sun burns the open land into a dry red sea of dust like the surface of Mars. (50°C, day after day, full of despair. Hot wind carries sand and dust into every crack, making every breath dry and rough. So the people here dig deep into the earth. Homes, hotels, churches, and even bars are hidden inside cool rock caves. In that permanent darkness, they turn abandoned mining tunnels into a normal life. This town supplies about 70 to 80% of the world's precious white opal. And for decades, many residents have dug tunnels right beneath their homes, hoping to find a sparkling opal trapped underground. Coober Pedy proves that when the outside world becomes unbearable, humans do not give up. They adapt, change, and turn even the earth itself into their home. There is a place where living among dry cliffs feels easier to breathe. Svalbard appears bare and rough, the ground drained of life. Grey gravel cliffs are clung to by colourful buildings and containers resisting the sea wind. Smoke from factories keeps curling into the dull grey sky. Not far away is the ghost town of Pyramiden. Thousands of miners once lived there. Now all that remains are silent rows of buildings with no human sound. Right where people are desperately trying to build life, nature rejects one supreme rule: decomposition. Bodies cannot decompose in the permafrost. They remain perfectly preserved forever. Because of that, a harsh rule was established. Dying is illegal. Survival here is a gamble. When people step outside, each person has to carry a rifle on their shoulder to defend themselves from polar bears. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, storing more than 1 million seed samples, is seen as humanity's final survival plan if a global disaster ever happens. When the temperature drops so low that fuel begins to thicken, most of the world would shut down. But in Yakutsk, that is just a normal day. Buried in the vast region of Siberia, this city is home to more than 350,000 residents. Winter, at minus 50 degrees Celsius, lasts for 8 long months. In just a few minutes, eyelashes freeze, breath turns into white mist, and skin begins to ache as if thousands of needles are piercing it. The permafrost, frozen several meters deep, forces buildings to be built on concrete piles for insulation. Cars often run all night because turning them off means they might not start again the next morning. And yet life continues despite the brutal temperature. People still go to work. Children still go to school in thick layers of clothing like armor to avoid frostbite. They spend the day selling frozen fish and other goods in outdoor markets. The people here have learned to turn freezing cold into part of everyday life. Although Yakutsk is known as the coldest city in the world, Oymyakon is the extreme edge of human life in the cold. This village of about 500 residents once recorded a harsh temperature of minus 67.7 degrees Celsius. It is freezing, and it feels like breathing in thousands of tiny shards of glass. The cold slips deep into the lungs, sharp enough to make every breath burn. The ground is buried permanently under ice for 9 months. The sun is swallowed by the cold for almost the entire year. At this temperature, boiling water thrown into the air instantly turns into an ice cloud. In just a few breaths, your eyelashes and hair can freeze solid within minutes. Green vegetables can barely survive. People live on reindeer meat, frozen fish, and survival knowledge passed down through generations. Even though Oymyakon is isolated in the frozen wilderness, it still has a school, a post office, a gas station, and even a small airport. Thin trails of smoke rising through the milky white fog signal rare and stubborn life in a frozen world. No road leads here, there is no nearby city, and for nearly 3 months each year, the entire town is swallowed by darkness. Ittoqqortoormiit, located deep on Greenland's east coast, has only about 350 people, surrounded by thousands of kilometers of Arctic wilderness. Small, colorful houses sit quietly, standing in strong contrast to the sea, gray rock mountains and cold, white ice. The landscape is bare, with almost no trees. Despite its small size, this place sometimes welcomes giant visitors, icebergs drifting through the surrounding bays in all kinds of shapes. Winter can drop below -35 degrees, with fierce Arctic winds sweeping through and making every sound feel empty. Even so, life here continues. Hunting and fishing have supported the community for generations. During the coldest months, dog sleds and snowmobiles are used to move across snow and frozen sea. In an age where almost everywhere is connected, this small town still lives in near-total isolation at the far edge of the Arctic. Welcome to Utqiaġvik, located on the shore of the Arctic Ocean in Alaska, where nature challenges every rule. You cannot get there by car or train. You can only travel by plane. On one side is frozen tundra with not even a single tree. On the other side is a cold ocean locked in ice for most of the year. Spread across an area of about 56 square kilometers, this small city is home to nearly 5,000 residents. The sun disappears for 65 straight days, sinking the town into an endless Arctic night. Then it returns with months of midnight sun, where 3 in the morning looks no different from 3 in the afternoon. This extreme rhythm controls almost everything in Utqiaġvik. The people rely deeply on nature to survive. They hunt whales on the frozen sea and use the meat to survive through the long winter in the vast wilderness. In summer, when the ice melts, cargo ships bring heavy supplies here, but only once a year. Hidden deep in the Sahara Desert, about 240 kilometers north of Timbuktu, Araouane appears like a few sand-colored mud houses slowly melting into the endless desert ocean. No trees, no paved roads, no rivers, only hot winds from the Sahara sweeping through like the breath of a giant furnace. Some years, not even a single drop seems to appear, while summer temperatures often rise above 45 degrees Celsius. In that bone-dry land, a few hundred residents still hold on inside houses made of mud and salt. Drinking water has to be brought in from elsewhere, becoming more valuable than anything else. For centuries, Araouane was once an important stop for salt caravans crossing the Sahara. Right where life always stands close to the edge of survival. Just one violent sandstorm or one delayed supply trip is enough to make the whole village feel how fragile humans are before the endless desert. You walk across the burning sand of Timbuktu, where every footprint is quickly erased by wind from the Sahara Desert. It was once the legendary crossroads of caravans carrying salt, gold, and knowledge, but behind that reputation is a land harsh to the point of cruelty. In front of you, the clay mosque tower rises like a mountain shaped from the dust of the Sahara Desert itself. Wooden beams stick out from the rough walls, forming temporary steps for workers to climb and reapply layers of mud after each rare rainy season. The white cloth wrapped around your head can only block part of the heat pouring down from the cloudless sky. There is no sound except the dry breath of the desert sweeping through. In that isolated sea of sand, more than 50,000 residents still hold on. They preserve ancient libraries and buildings that once made Timbuktu the greatest center of knowledge in medieval Africa. Between an ocean of sand and heat above 45 degrees Celsius, humans built structures that have lasted for centuries, using only earth, water, and willpower. Old sailors used to call this place the Gates of Hell. Today, the world knows it as the Skeleton Coast, stretching along the Atlantic Ocean in Namibia. Imagine you standing in a place where the desert meets the ocean in a collision of extremes. Giant dunes slide down toward the cold sea, covered by a deep drifting layer of fog. The name comes from the scene it once carried, scattered with the massive bones of whales. Thousands of shipwrecks rot along the sandy shore, slowly chewed by waves, year after year. Many sailors drifted into the thick fog, only realizing too late that the ocean had silently pulled them into its own graveyard. But in this almost unforgiving land, life still exists. Seals cover the coast. Desert lions and jackals wander across the dunes, searching for water and food. For generations, the Himba people have lived in harmony with this harsh desert by understanding every wind, animal track, and hidden water source. Phugtal Monastery lies hidden deep in the remote Zanskar region, where the Zarabchu River cuts through isolated valleys so distant that time seems to have forgotten them. For many months of the year, nature locks every entrance with snow. Perched on a high cliff, the monastery looks as if it has grown out of the mountain itself. Stone and mud buildings stack on top of each other like a honeycomb, defying gravity. No steel, no concrete, no modern engineering, only ancient wisdom keeps it clinging to the cliff. Imagine you walking for days through freezing valleys where glaciers crack and groan under every step. Local porters carry terrifyingly heavy building materials on their backs through snow and ice, while children turn that danger into a game. The monks at Phugtal still live like their ancestors did hundreds of years ago, carrying water from the river below, enduring isolated winters, and sharing almost everything they have in mountains that seem like they were never meant for humans. Hidden in the northern Indian state of Himachal Pradesh is a region called Spiti Valley, the name that means the land in between. Surrounded by bare mountain ranges, icy streams, and endless wilderness, Hikkim feels completely cut off from the chaos of the modern world. Winding roads cross dangerous mountain passes like Kunzumla, creating a feeling of tension and awe. As you get closer to the village, the harsh beauty of the dry land appears with traditional mud houses and prayer flags flying in the cold wind. At this altitude, oxygen levels plummet, the air here is thin and freezing, constantly reminding you of the brutal height. Yet, over 80 residents survive by raising livestock and farming on the barren, rocky soil, enduring long, freezing winters. Amidst that silver-grey sea of mountains, the world's highest post office quietly continues to operate, sending letters across snow-covered mountain passes. Can you believe there exists a village where simply driving there is enough to make many turn back halfway due to lack of oxygen and the sheer drop in the abyss? At more than 4,200 meters high in the Himalayas, Kibber looks like a cluster of white fortresses trapped on the giant rock. Square houses made of earth and stone are crammed onto the steep mountainside, below which lies a deep abyss hollowed out by the cold wind over thousands of years. There are no protective fences, only narrow dirt roads crawling along the edge of the abyss, like fragile cracks in a sea of grey mountains. But the most terrifying thing is that the wild nature never sleeps. This is the territory of the snow leopard, a silent predator, warning that humans are only borrowing this land temporarily. Amidst the icy mountains, prayer flags still flutter in the wind, and the people of Kibber survive by building stone houses to retain heat and stockpiling food to get through the long winter that threatens to swallow the entire village. Far removed from any habitable continent, McMurdo Station emerges in Antarctica like a base stranded on Mars. Box-like structures of corrugated iron and steel huddle together on the frigid volcanic rock, facing a vast expanse of white ice stretching to the horizon. More than 1,000 people live here, enduring raging storms with speeds of 160 kilometers per hour, working in record-breaking temperatures that can reach minus 50 degrees Celsius. In contrast to the pure white of the distant snow-covered mountains, the ground here is torn up by dark, grey dirt tracks. Fuel pipelines and power cables run wild like exposed veins, trying to pump life into the dry, bare gravel and rock. Inside the metal structures, always heated, they try to maintain a sense of normalcy with coffee, movies, and small gyms. While outside, the summer sun shines for almost 24 hours, almost obscuring the concept of time. Each workday feels like a survival mission. Imagine a place so barren that even NASA uses it to simulate missions to Mars. This is Devon Island, the largest uninhabited island on Earth, located deep in the Canadian Arctic. Spanning nearly 55,000 square kilometers, it has no towns, roads, or permanent residents. For most of the year, Devon Island is locked down by frost, while Arctic winds roam across barren rock debris, wiping out any trace of life. The real problem comes down to four things: no arable soil, no fresh water, no access roads, and no reason to stay. All food, fuel, and equipment have to be brought in at huge expense through iceberg-filled waters. Most of the surface is just fractured rock and impact craters, so dry that its rainfall is as low as the Sahara Desert. Humans once tried to survive here, but in the end, they were kicked off the island by the freezing cold and loneliness. Today, Devon Island is called Mars on Earth, a land that looks more like another planet than a place for humans. The East Antarctic Plateau spreads out to nearly the size of Australia, a frozen desert buried under ice more than 3 kilometers thick, a graveyard for any spark of life. Standing tough at an altitude of over 3,000 meters above sea level, this plateau breaks any influence from the ocean, creating a perfect death trap with temperatures that have hit a low of minus 98 degrees Celsius. No trees, no birds, only wind, ice, and a silence that lasts so long time itself seems frozen. The cold here is strong enough to crush any sign of life. Yet right underneath that endless snow, extremophile microorganisms still survive. Humans have also managed to set up a foothold on the East Antarctic Plateau. A few research stations are scattered across the frozen landscape. The largest of these is the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, home to about 100 scientists and support staff. They drill kilometers deep into ancient ice to read Earth's climate history, turning this dead land into a massive living laboratory for humanity. In Verkhoyansk, the issue isn't how well you can handle the cold. The issue is whether you can survive in a place where nature switches from a frozen hell to a burning furnace in just a few months. Located deep in the Yana River Valley of Russia, this small town of about 1,000 residents once recorded a freezing minus 67.8 degrees Celsius in winter and over 38 degrees Celsius in summer. A difference of more than 100 degrees Celsius between seasons makes Verkhoyansk feel like it has to endure both the Arctic and the desert in the exact same year. Winter grips this land for nearly 9 months. Snow locks down the ground, and the sound of footsteps rings out crisp and dry in the frozen air. Then summer shows up, the permafrost starts to turn to mush, and roads sink into deep mud. And millions of mosquitoes rise up from the freshly awakened swamps. Yet, the people still herd reindeer, hunt, and raise their kids, while nature constantly changes the rules of the game. They have to adapt to both of nature's most opposite extremes in the same year. Not far away, Norilsk has to learn to breathe in the very harshness that humans created. Located about 400 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, more than 170,000 people are almost completely cut off from the rest of Russia. There are no roads leading here. If you want to get into Norilsk, you can only fly or take a boat depending on the season. Just leaving the city is already a complicated journey. Minus 30 degrees Celsius wraps around the city for 9 months, and endless darkness swallows it whole for 6 straight weeks. But that's just the opening act. Norilsk grew out of the permafrost and mines for nickel, copper, and palladium. Smoke from the factories crawls across the sky like a toxic grey fog, coating the air with a metallic smell. Trees slowly die from acid rain. It's no surprise that the average life expectancy here is among the lowest in Russia, 10 years lower than the national average. Restaurants, cafes, and living areas are hidden underground, but the feeling of isolation and gloom sticks to the residents, turning it into one of the most depressed cities in the world. A settlement perched precariously at the extreme altitude of 5,100 meters, high above the clouds. Here, residents have to live in thin air where oxygen levels are only about 50% of what's normal. Sitting far away from the modern world, La Rinconada is a place where danger is always lurking around the corner. Around 50,000 people came to settle in this harsh land for one single reason: gold. Everyone carries a dream of hitting it rich. The chemicals used in gold processing have contaminated the soil and the water used here. There are no kitchens or bathrooms in these homes, and thousands of people have to share public toilets and showers for their personal needs. nature has to make way for trash. A powerful foul stench hits your nose out of nowhere. The grey town blends into the cold sky like a giant scar on the slope of the Andes Mountains. Most of the gold miners here never find the wealthy life they traded their health and lives to chase. The Changtang sits over 4,000 meters high in the middle of the Tibetan Plateau, like a roof of wind and frost hanging in mid-air. In this place, the sunlight is as sharp as glass, and the air is so thin that every breath feels like it's borrowed from the harsh land itself. The Changtang almost entirely rejects life. The ground is cracked, cold winds constantly scrape through the rocky valleys, and the silence presses heavy on your chest. During the day, the frozen lakes reflect a dazzling white light, like molten metal. But just hours later, the ice cracks under the biting cold, letting sounds drift away into an emptiness so vast that feels you vanished. Yet even in this harshness, a quiet resilience fights back. Nomadic families move to the rhythm of the land, guided by an instinct older than memory itself. They follow the migrations of their herds, trusting in rules that have outlasted empires. If you travel from Kyrgyzstan to Tajikistan, your first stop is Karakul, a small, remote village sitting right next to a high-altitude lake at around 4,000 meters. The simple white houses with flat roofs and colorful windows blend perfectly into the majestic landscape. The deep blue water of Lake Karakul reflects the sky, while majestic snow-capped mountains loom in the distance, creating a striking contrast with the barren, rocky plateau. The village is incredibly quiet, with only a handful of houses gripping the barren land. There is a small shop and a well where locals come to collect drinking water. They live by herding yaks, sheep, and goats, surviving under the cold and the winds blowing off the Pamir Plateau. Take a step back and let the stillness of this place guide you. Even though it's one of the most visited places in the United States, the Grand Canyon area still hides many secrets. One of them is the Native American village of Supai, located at the bottom of Havasu Canyon. Supai is a tiny village surrounded by massive, vertical cliffs on all sides, Even though it's only about 13 kilometers from the main road, cars cannot get here. The only way in is by helicopter or a strenuous hike. Supai is also the only place in the United States where mail is still delivered by mules. The Supai people have lived here for over 800 years, relying on Havasu Creek to farm and survive in the middle of the dry rock. When winter rolls down into the canyon, they move up to the higher ground to hunt and live. Today, the village has many modern facilities to serve tourists, like a cafe, a few small shops, and a lodge. The village also has a school, a Mormon chapel, and a Christian church, among other buildings. Socotra, a tropical island off the coast of Yemen, is a land holding one of the most bizarre ecosystems in the world, rejecting all regular rules of evolution. Sitting isolated in the middle of a vicious sea, Socotra has to bear the brutal punishment of violent winds for months, along with a heat that scorches away any sign of life. The ground is scraped into a dry, bare, rocky plateau, and vertical cliffs swallow any footsteps that lose their way. To fight back against nature, the plants here were forced to twist into alien shapes. The most famous is the dragon's blood tree, shaped like giant flying saucers gripping onto the barren rocks. When their rough bark is lightly cut, they don't bleed sap. Instead, they cry a red liquid, a biological weapon that helps the trees protect themselves from the burning sun. Yet humans still found a way to take root here. The shabby town of Hadibo features raw concrete houses exposed to the sun and wind. Markets are busy with people buying and selling fresh fish, while wild goats roam around eating trash everywhere. Hidden between the border of South and Central America, the Darien Gap appears like a primitive scar, completely breaking the Pan-American Highway. This green hell locks away a swampy, muddy mess, jagged and steep mountain ranges, and tropical rainforests so thick they swallow all sunlight. The dangerous terrain, hot and humid climate, and constant rain make building a road almost impossible and extremely expensive. The Darien Gap is the only land route for migrants looking for a better life. Hundreds of thousands of people from all over, fleeing poverty and violence, have chosen to dive straight into this green hell to find a way to the US. Tiny indigenous villages that used to live isolated lives relying on the old forest are now squeezed and overwhelmed by the waves of refugees. The residents of the Darien Gap stubbornly keep their roots in Mother Earth. They hollow out ancient tree trunks into dugout canoes to cut a path through rivers filled with mud and boulders. In the middle of the endless South Pacific, Pitcairn Island sits lonely, like a piece of rock exiled by the ocean from human world. This volcanic island, measuring less than 4.5 square kilometers, is home to fewer than 40 residents. There is no airport or safe seaport. If you want to get to Pitcairn, you have to spend nearly 30 hours drifting among the rough waves of the Pacific Ocean. Vertical cliffs stand like giant walls guarding the island, while the sea rages day and night, smashing against the rocky shore with waves meters high. The amazing thing is that humans still exist here. Life relies heavily on self-sufficiency and aid from the British government. The island has only one small medical clinic and a single school for primary-aged children. As they grow up, students are forced to leave the island for New Zealand to study, leaving Pitcairn to face a severe aging and shrinking population. Because of this harshness, even though the government once had a policy offering free land, the number of people daring to settle here long-term can be counted on one hand. Tristan is actually the summit of a massive volcano rising 2,000 meters from the ocean floor. From afar, it looks harsh and uninhabitable, but on the island exists a village called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, approximately 0.23 miles in size. Over 200 residents live by fishing, farming, and crafts, and cannot fly directly to the island as there is absolutely no airport. Transportation is only possible by sea. Three ships regularly visit the island, totaling about 10 trips per year. Life on the island has the basic necessities, just far less. There is only one school for children up to 16. To pursue higher education, one must leave the island for England or St. Helena. A rudimentary hospital with a traveling doctor, unable to handle serious emergencies. If someone needs emergency surgery, the island is almost powerless due to the lack of an airport and the need to wait for a boat. This place is like an old English fishing village cut up and thrown into the South Atlantic, living in the silent shadow of a still-awakened volcano. Our journey through these harsh lands concludes here. They create arid deserts, endless icy regions, and plateaus where even breathing becomes a test of survival. Yet time and again, humanity tenaciously clings to these seemingly uninhabitable places. They build homes, they live, and they keep moving forward. These harsh lands not only test the body, they test courage, faith, and the deepest will to survive. How long do you think you could survive in one of these places? Share your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoy these kinds of challenging adventures, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next trips.